Great, so what we're gonna do in this lecture is we'll start building this graph out of this data. So this graph was generated out of 10 days of stock market data, so it's not a great representation to make any buying decisions because you have few data, so you don't really see the trend here. But if you have more data, so if we increase this range here, you'll get a bigger picture here with lots of candlesticks and everything will make more sense. So the script that we'll write will work with any number of data. This is what we have so far, so let me go Shift J and Shift M to merge the cells. So just some housekeeping there. Now my notebook is more organized. And so we're importing the data from the pandas data reader, import datetime, and we also need to import now the required modules from Bokeh. So we said we'll be using glyphs, so we'll be using maybe a rectangle for these figures and then a segment for these vertical lines. So these are available from the Bokeh.plotting interface. So from Bokeh.plotting we need the figure object, the show method, and the output file method as well to output the HTML file with a graph in it. And then we read the data frame from the data reader method of the data module of the pandas data reader library. So for now we can leave it like this, but then later we can programmatically change the name parameter here so that we can quickly pass various kinds of company symbols here. So in this case we have Google. We can simply pass other symbols and then get the chart for any company. Let me delete this variable here, so we have a clean cell there, and we go to the next cell. We got an invalid syntax there when I executed the cell. From Bokeh plotting, yeah, you can see here that the arrow is pointing you to this part of the code. So in this line you have passed something wrong. So from Bokeh.plotting you should import figure and then the comma and show output and etc. So delete these cells and here we go. Now what we can do first is well, you need to think about building the structure of your plot. So that means you need to establish a figure object, and then we'll have a spatial x-axis here, so that should be a datetime axis. So what we could do is we store the figure object in a p variable figure, and then let's say the x-axis type parameter equals to the date time string. And let's give the plot a width of 1000 and a height of 300. Then pass a title there. Let's say candlestick chart. So at this point we should have an empty plot area with these dimensions. And now we should think about how we plot these boxes. So let's think about the boxes first. And there may be a couple of ways to generate these boxes. The first that I think of is the quad method that generates quadrants. So for the quad method, you'd have to pass a left border for the rectangle and then a right border and then the bottom and the top limits as well. So for the left border you would have to pass here is the data frame. Let's print that out. So for the left border you would have to pass the start date. So we have a datetime axis here, And then generally these candlesticks are, the width of these boxes is equal to 12 hours. You can also build wider rectangles there, but this is an optimal representation, so experience says that this is better. So 12 hours, and then you have a 12-hour gap, so 24 hours span for the day, for the first day, and then the next day is here, 12-hour width for the rectangle. This happens to be a very narrow one, but and then 12-hour gap, and then the third day 12-hour gap, fourth day, and then we have here we have that would be 48 hours, so we have a weekend here with 48 hours, and then the next day, and so on. So the quadrants. And for the bottom and the top limits, you would have to pass the opening and the closing values, so the price in dollars. And here we need to do a trick, so I explained to you that where the closing price is higher than the opening price, we would have like a gray rectangle, let's say, with one color. But in other cases, like in the third row here, where the closing price is less than the opening price, we would have a rectangle. That means we need to actually build two different sets of glyphs for the boxes. So we're still talking about the boxes here. So that means you would have something like p quad and then p quad again. And then for the first function, so for the first set of quadrants, you would have to pass only those data frame rows that satisfy the condition that the closing price is higher than the opening price. So we would have to write something like, let me delete this. Let me create a cell there. So df, first of all, df.index is how you select the date range. So date is listed as an index of the data frame here. These are simple columns: open, high, low, close, volume, and adjusted close, but this is an index. So to access date, you say df.index. To access open, the open column, you can do df.open, and you get those values. So how about filtering only the rows of the data frame where close is higher than open? Well, with df.index, you select the entire date range, so we need only the cells with close higher than open. That means out of this range, you need to make another sub-selection, which would be like df.close is higher than df.open. So this is like a condition that is applied to this range. Now if I execute this, I get only four values. So the first value is 1st of March, so this one here. Yeah, here is close is higher than open here. Yeah, so close is greater than open. This. Then we have open is higher here, and 8th of March is close is higher than open. Yeah, here as well, and here too. Great. So what does this mean then? Well, this means that when you pass here the coordinates, so for the left limit of your quadrants, you'd have to pass this expression. So that's more or less how you build this chart using quadrants. Now, I would like actually to use rectangles to build the chart. I've tried both quadrants and rectangles, and I think rectangles give you a better default zoom of the overall graph. So when I built a graph with quadrants, you have some areas here, so some glyphs will be cut off the axis, but you can solve that by setting a default zoom, so that's not a problem. And so I'd ask you to actually use quadrants after I built these with rectangles, so as an exercise. but for building this program I'll use rectangles. So now you know how to filter this data. We'll be using these filters so for rectangles as well, because with rectangles we also need to build two sets of rectangles, so p.rect, p.rect here as well. And so let's do that in the next lecture. Let's keep this lecture short, and I'll talk to you later.